Showmore 1401, a small Montana town sleeps under October rain. 2 miles past the last streetlight, at the dead end of a road, nobody drive by accident, 40 motorcycles sit nose to tail outside a bar with a bullet hole in the sign. Inside, a jukebox plays. Men laugh. The wind shifts. A barefoot boy comes through it, 10 years old, soaked to the bone, blood drying along his jaw. He does not stop at the threshold. He does not look at the bikes, the leather, the smoke. He runs straight to the biggest man in the room and grabs his vest like life support. His lips move once, 6 words, quiet enough to be a prayer. The jukebox finishes its song. The pool balls go still. Outside, headlights cut through the rain. 3 men step out of a black sedan. One of them is smiling. The door blows open. The door blows open again. The rain came down on Cedar Falls, Montana, the way it always came down in October. Slow at first, then mean, then biblical. The kind of rain that didn't ask permission, didn't apologize, didn't quit until it had washed something clean or buried something for good. The kind of rain old men in this part of the country still call drowning weather, because once it started, the river swelled, the back roads turned to soup, and the dead seemed to stir under the soaked earth. Inside Throttle's bar, the rain was just background noise. A low drum beat under the rumble of Harleys parked nose to tail along the curb, under the jukebox grinding out an old Waylon Jennings track for the 3rd time that night, under the laughter of 40 leather-clad men who had ridden too many miles together to need words to fill the silence. The bar sat at the dead end of Old Mill Road, 2 miles past the last streetlight, where the town's working folks turned around and the wilder ones kept going. The wooden sign above the door had been repainted twice in 20 years, but the bullet hole in the upper left corner remained untouched, almost reverent. Locals said that hole was a reminder of what nobody asked twice. Slade Mercer sat alone in his corner booth. The corner had no name on it, but every man in the Iron Riders Motorcycle Club knew not to take that seat. Slade Mercer, 6'5", 280 pounds of stillness, sat where the wall met the wall, where he could see every door, every window, every face. His beard had gone the color of old steel. His hands lay flat on the wood, palms down, fingers spread the way a man rests his hands when he's already counted every exit in the room. His brothers called him Bear, not because of the size, though the size helped. They called him Bear because of the way he carried weight. Quiet, without complaint, like the animal that walked through winter carrying everything it owned on its back. Bear was 63 years old. He had ridden with the Iron Riders for 31 of those years. Before that, 2 tours in the Army, an honorable discharge, a steel plate behind his left ear, from a roadside in a country he never talked about. After that, 12 years working construction with his brother Hank, until Hank went into the ground at 45 with a heart attack that nobody saw coming. After Hank, there had been a wife. After the wife, there had been a son. After the son, there had been a grandson. And then there had been no one. Bear did not think about that anymore. Or more truthfully, he thought about it the way you think about a chronic ache, the way you carry it in the joint of your hip until you forget you are limping. He sipped his coffee. He looked at the door. He did not order a drink. He had not ordered a drink in 8 years and 3 months. He could have told you the day. He never did. Brock Hogan was at the pool table. Brock was the sergeant-at-arms, 51, bald, built like a furnace with a laugh that could rattle glass. He was winning. He was always winning at pool. The rumor went that he had played his way across 3 states in the late 90s and never lost a rack he cared about. Dax Flynn was at the corner of the bar, hunched over his laptop. Wrench the brothers called him because in another life, he had been the youngest electrical engineer at a defense contractor in Colorado Springs. And in this life, he was the man you went to when your phone got hacked, your wife's lawyer was watching your messages, or your kid's school had locked you out of the parent portal. Wrench was 44. Wrench wore reading glasses now. Wrench did not like it when people pointed that out. The rest were scattered. Cruz Donovan, Rex Steele, Jax Pierce, Stone Briggs, Kane, Dalton, Axel Riggs, Gunnar Locke, and another 30 men, most of them between 50 and 70, most of them carrying scars they had stopped explaining, most of them sober, most of them married, most of them grandfathers. You would not have known it to look at them. That was the point. The door blew open. 40 heads turned slow. Not afraid, curious. Throttles had a rhythm, and the rhythm did not include the door blowing open at 9:15 on a Tuesday in October. The wind came in first carrying the rain, then came the boy. He was 10 years old. He was barefoot. His feet were so red they looked like they had been dipped in paint. His shirt, which might have once been blue, was plastered to his ribs. His hair was the color of wheat, but the rain had darkened it almost black. His left eye had a bruise that was no more than a day old. His lower lip was split. There was a single thin line of blood drying along his jaw. He did not stop. That was the part nobody at Throttles would forget. He did not stop at the threshold to look around. He did not pause to be afraid of the bikes, of the leather, of the smoke. He came through the door like a deer being chased through a fence, and he ran. He ran past the pool table, past the jukebox, past Brock and Cruz and Stone, and he ran straight to the biggest man in the room. Bear had not yet stood up. The boy reached the booth. His small hands, blue around the knuckles, white at the fingertips, grabbed the leather of Bear's cut. He grabbed it the way a child grabs his mother's coat in a crowd. He grabbed it like life support. He pressed his face against Bear's sleeve, and he whispered, his voice barely louder than the rain on the tin roof. "Please don't let him take me again." The bar went silent. 40 grown men, men who had been laughing a half-second earlier, stopped breathing at the same time. The jukebox finished its song and did not start the next. The pool balls on Brock's table clicked once and went still. Even the rain for a moment seemed to lean closer. Bear looked down. He did not move his body. He moved only his eyes. He looked at the small hand fisted in the leather of his vest. He looked at the knuckles where the skin had gone blue from cold. He looked at the wrist. The wrist. Bear had been a soldier. Bear had been a mechanic. Bear had buried his brother, his wife, his son, and his grandson. Bear had walked through the kinds of rooms most men in Cedar Falls did not know existed. And when Bear looked at the boy's wrist, his stomach did something he had not felt it do in 12 years. There was a band of raw, weeping skin around that wrist, about 1.5 inches wide. The flesh had been rubbed down to wet red, in places almost black. There were small horizontal cuts where the rope had bitten the deepest. The same wound circled the other wrist. There was old rope fiber still caught in the broken skin. Bear had seen rope burns before, but never on a child. Slowly, very slowly, the way a man approaches a hurt animal, Bear raised one massive hand. He laid it on the back of the boy's wet head. The boy flinched. Bear did not pull back. He just held his hand there, light as a leaf, and waited until the flinching stopped. "Son," Bear said in a voice that should have been too low for the boy to hear, but that the boy heard anyway. "Who did this to you?" The boy did not answer. He could not answer. He was shaking too hard. Brock crossed the room. He did not run. Brock didn't run for anyone or anything, but he crossed in 5 long strides, and he stopped at the edge of the booth, and his big hand went to the grip of the folding knife on his belt without anyone seeing him do it. Wrench at the bar was already setting his glasses straight on his nose and watching the door. Cruz had moved without seeming to move at all. He was now between the door and the booth. That was how the Iron Riders worked. You didn't have to give an order. You just had to need one. Bear's hand still on the boy's head leaned down. "Easy, easy, kid. You're inside, you're warm. Nobody's taking you anywhere. Can you tell me your name?" The boy's whole body shuddered. "Wyatt," he whispered. "Wyatt Carver." "Wyatt." Bear nodded once. He pronounced the name the way you pronounce the name of someone who has just become important. "How old are you, Wyatt?" 10. I'm 10. 10. Bear's eyes did not leave the boy's wrists. "Wyatt, listen to me real careful. Who hurt you?" Wyatt opened his mouth. The door blew open. For the second time in 90 seconds, the wind and the rain came through the threshold of Throttle's bar. But this time it was not a barefoot child. This time it was 3 men. The lead one stepped in first the way the lead one always does. He was lean. He was somewhere between 38 and 45, and you could not have nailed the year more than that. His head was shaved down to dark stubble. His eyes were pale gray, the color of river ice in February. He wore tactical pants, a black soft-shell jacket, and on his right hip openly the unmistakable shape of a holstered handgun. The 2 behind him wore black uniforms, the kind that almost looked like real law enforcement, but were not real, the kind you can buy off the internet for $200. They were younger. They were thicker. One had a face like a bag of gravel, the other was clean-shaven and trying not to let his eyes dart around the room. The lead one let his gaze drift across the bar. He smiled. It was a small, controlled smile, the kind of smile a man uses when he wants you to think he is reasonable. "Evening, gentlemen," he said. His voice was clean, polite, almost soft. "Sorry to interrupt your night." Nobody answered. His eyes landed on the booth, on Bear, on the buck clinging to Bear's vest. "There he is," the man said, the way a parent says it at the end of a long game of hide and seek. "There's our little runner." He took a step inward. Cruz Donovan against the wall by the door did not move. Cruz did not move because Cruz was deciding in real time whether or not to break this man's wrist. Cruz had not made up his mind yet. The lead man held up both hands, palms forward. "Easy, easy everyone. I know how this looks." He nodded toward Wyatt. "My name is Garrett Decker. I'm with Sentinel Private Recovery. We're licensed in 4 states, and we are bringing this boy home tonight to a family that has been out of its mind with worry for the last 72 hours. Wyatt's whole body locked against Bear's sleeve like a vice. The shaking stopped. It did not stop because the fear was gone. It stopped because there was a fear so large it had passed the threshold where shaking helps. Bear felt it. He did not look at Decker. He kept his hand on the boy's head, and he asked in the same low, quiet voice he had used a minute ago, "Wyatt, do you know this man?" Wyatt did not answer with his mouth. He answered with his fingers. His grip on Bear's cut tightened until Bear could feel the small knuckles digging into the bone of his rib. "That's not your answer, son," Bear said almost gently. "I need to hear it out loud." The boy's voice came up from the bottom of a well. "He took me," Wyatt whispered, "off the bus. He's the one who took me off the bus." The room did not gasp. Iron Riders did not gasp. The room got instead 10 degrees colder. Garrett Decker laughed. It was a careful, measured, professional laugh. "Gentlemen," he said, "the boy is traumatized. We see this a lot in recovery work. Kidnapped children frequently misidentify their rescuers as their abductors. It's a documented psychological response. Stockholm in reverse." He took another careful step forward. "If you'd be willing to release him to my custody, I have documentation right here. Court order, parental consent, the works." He patted the inside pocket of his jacket. Bear's eyes flicked finally to Decker's face. The two men looked at each other. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. In those 4 seconds, Bear, who had been a soldier, who had read enemies across courtyards and roadsides his whole adult life, learned everything he needed to know about Garrett Decker. He read it in the smile that did not reach the eyes. He read it in the way the right hand kept floating casually toward the holster. He read it in the way the 2 men behind Decker were standing too close to each other, like men who had only worked together for a few weeks. He read it in the way Decker had glanced for less than a second at Wyatt's wrists and then deliberately not looked at them again. Bear did not show any of what he read. He just nodded slow. "Show me the paperwork," Bear said. "Of course." Decker reached into his jacket. Cruz Donovan moved. He moved exactly 6 inches, just enough that his right hand was now resting casually on the haft of the framing hammer hanging from his belt. Cruz never carried a gun in the bar. Cruz did not need a gun in the bar. The hammer would do. Decker noticed. Decker pretended not to notice. He drew out a manila envelope, opened it, and laid 4 pages on the bar top. They looked at a glance like court documents. State of Montana letterhead, a judge's signature, a photograph of a boy blurry that might have been Wyatt and might not have been. Wrench, without standing up, swiveled his laptop toward the bar and tapped 4 keys. "Slate," he said quietly. "Slate Mercer." He never called Bear that. He never called him anything but Bear. The use of the formal name was a signal. The signal meant, "I need you to hear me." Bear looked at him. Wrench turned the laptop so only Bear could see the screen. He had pulled up the Montana Department of Justice's missing children database. He had typed in the date, the county, the age range. There were 0 entries. No active Amber Alert, no missing child report, no bulletin, no APB, no record of a Wyatt Carver age 10 taken anywhere in the state of Montana in the last week. There was nothing. There had been nothing. Officially, Wyatt Carver did not exist as a missing child. Bear let his eyes rest on the screen for 2 seconds. Then he raised them slowly and looked at Decker. "Funny thing," Bear said, boy disappears 3 days ago. Family loses their minds with worry, and there's not one report on file." Decker did not blink. The family requested a private response, he said smoothly. No police involvement. We were retained to keep this discreet. Discreet, Bear repeated. Discreet. Mr. Decker. Bear's voice had not risen at all. It had, if anything, gone lower. Where exactly did the bus stop where you say this boy was taken? Decker's jaw moved once almost imperceptibly. I'm not at liberty to disclose operational details in front of civilians. Mr. Decker, the boy says you took him off a school bus. There's been no Amber Alert. There's been no police report. There's been no operation on file with the state. There's no parent in here with you. And the boy's got rope burns on his wrists that are not 3 days old. They're maybe 12 hours old, 14 at the most. Bear's eyes drifted deliberately to Decker's belt. Care to revise your story before this gets formal? For a single beat, Decker's face did not move. Then it moved. The mask slipped the way a mask slips when a man realizes the room has read him. The polite professional smile flattened. The pale gray eyes hardened. The right hand stopped pretending to float and went openly to the grip of the handgun on his hip. Hand over the boy, Decker said. His voice had not risen either. That was the worst part. His voice had not risen. Brock's knife was already out of its sheath. He held it low against his thigh where the table hid it from Decker. Cruz had the hammer loose in his fingers. Stonebriggs had stepped somehow without anyone seeing him move into a position behind the two backup men blocking their exit. Jax Pierce, who never wore his cut to the bar, but who had it on tonight because his wife had washed his jacket and he hadn't picked it up yet, was angled to cut off the bar's emergency exit. The entire room had in 11 seconds become a single coordinated organism, and Decker had not noticed because Decker was busy looking at Bear. Mr. Decker, Bear said, I'm going to give you one piece of free advice tonight. He stood up. He did it slowly. The booth groaned as his weight came off the bench. 6'5", 280 pounds of a man who had stopped being afraid of consequences a very long time ago. Wyatt let go of his cut and stepped back, and Bear angled his body to put himself between Wyatt and the room. You came in here, Bear said, and you tried to walk out with the boy who has rope burns on his wrists. You came in here and you lied about who you were. You came in here with 2 men and 3 guns, and you tried to play paperwork with the Iron Riders Motorcycle Club. So here's the free advice. If you draw that pistol, you will be dead before it clears the holster. You and both your friends, and the only people in this bar tonight who will end up in handcuffs are the 3 of you. You understand what I'm saying, son? Don't call me son, Decker said. You're younger than my son was, Bear said. I'll call you what I want. Decker drew the gun. He cleared the holster. He did not get any farther than that. Brock's hand closed over Decker's wrist from below, twisted, and slammed the gun arm down onto the bar. The handgun clattered, skidded, and stopped at the edge by Wrench's laptop, who picked it up by the barrel with 2 fingers expertly and slid it across the polished wood to Stonebriggs. The 2 backup men reached for their own pieces and discovered that Cruz Donovan and Jax Pierce were already behind them, the way wolves are already behind a deer that thought it was running. One man's wrist popped audibly. The other dropped to his knees with Cruz's hammer pressed light as a feather against the back of his skull. In the world outside, sirens started. Bear had not given an order to call them. He had not needed to. Wrench, with 2 free hands and a laptop, had dialed dispatch the moment he saw the rope burns. He had told dispatch the address. He had said the words active abduction in progress and armed suspects and Detective Margaret Boone without raising his voice. Detective Margaret Boone was the only honest person in the Cedar Falls Police Department that the Iron Riders trusted by name, and she happened to be on shift, and she happened to be 8 minutes away. She came in with 4 uniformed officers behind her. Margaret Boone was 56. She had been a cop in Cedar Falls for 31 years. She was thin as a fence post, gray-haired with the kind of dry, weather-beaten face that suggested she had spent her entire adult life trying to find children who did not want to be found. She walked into Throttles, took in the room. The 3 disarmed men, the boy behind Bear's elbow, the rope burns, the manila envelope of fake court documents on the bar. She did not say what most cops would have said. She did not say, everybody put your hands up. She said instead, Bear, status. 3 suspects, Bear said. Disarmed. The lead one is one Garrett Decker, claims to be private recovery. Boy says they took him off the school bus 3 days ago. The boy says there are 5 more. 5 more, Boone repeated. 5 more. Boone's eyes closed for one full second. Then she opened them, and she became a person Bear had seen her become many times before. She became very precisely a woman who was about to do her job all the way through to the end of it. Cuff them, she said to her officers. All three. Read them all the way through. Don't let any of them get their hands near each other or near their pockets. I want everything they have on them in evidence bags. Boots, belts, jackets, all of it. Move. The officers moved. Decker, hands behind his back, looked for the first time exactly like what he was, a 39-year-old man who had run out of moves. He did not say anything. He stared straight ahead at the wall behind the bar. The mask did not come back. There was no charm left to call up. There was just a man who knew with absolute clarity that the easy part of his life had just ended. Boone crouched down beside Wyatt. Wyatt had pressed himself into the corner of the booth. He had his arms wrapped around his own ribs, the way children wrap their arms around themselves when there is no other body to hold them. Hi, Boone said. My name is Margaret. I'm a detective with the police, and I work very hard to find children who have been taken away from their families. May I sit? Wyatt looked at Bear. Bear nodded once. Wyatt nodded. Boone sat. She did not sit close. She sat far enough that the boy did not have to feel her, but close enough that he could hear her. She kept her hands visible on her knees. She did not write anything down. Wyatt, is that your name? Yes, ma'am. Wyatt Carver. Yes, ma'am. Wyatt, are your mother and father David and Sarah Carver? Your daddy teaches history at the high school. Wyatt looked up sharply. You know my dad. I went to school with your dad, sweetheart. About 100 years ago. He's a good man. He's been calling our department every day. He thinks you went missing on the way home from school on Friday. Wyatt's face crumpled. It was the face of a boy who had been holding it together for 72 hours and had just been given permission to stop. He's been calling, Wyatt whispered. Every day. Twice a day. He hasn't slept since Friday. The boy started to cry. He cried the way 10-year-old boys cry when no one has let them cry for 3 days. It was not loud. It was the silent, jagged crying of a child who has not yet remembered how to make sound. Bear, without looking around, reached one big hand and laid it flat on the top of Wyatt's head and left it there. Wyatt, Boone said very gently, I need to ask you something, and I know it's hard, but I need you to tell me the truth even if it scares you. Can you do that? Wyatt nodded. Are there more children with you? Are there other boys and girls being held somewhere? 5, Wyatt whispered. There's 5 more. There were 6 of us. They put us in offices, upstairs. The big one with the broken roof. The big one with the broken roof, Boone said. Sweetheart, do you know what that building is called? It used to make pipes, Wyatt said. There's a sign in front. It's got rust on it. More something. Morrison, said Bear. His voice was so quiet you would have missed it if you weren't right next to him. The Morrison Pipe Works, East Side, closed in 2019. Boone looked up at him. That's the one, she said. She stood up. She walked 3 measured steps to where Decker was sitting handcuffed at the bar. She did not touch him. She did not lean in. She just stood directly in front of him, and she let him look at her face. Mr. Decker, she said, in the next 48 hours, you are going to learn something about Cedar Falls. You are going to learn that this is a small town, and small towns in Montana have memories. You took 6 children. You put 6 children in a building. You decided you were going to make money off frightened parents who don't have any money. And tonight you walked into a bar full of grown men who every single one of them, know what it feels like to lose somebody small and not be able to get them back. Decker did not look up. You're going to talk to me tonight, Boone said, and you are going to tell me where the other 5 children are, and what time they last ate, and where the guards are stationed, and how many weapons are in that building. You are going to tell me all of those things, because if you don't, I am going to step out of that interrogation room, and I am going to leave the door unlocked, and I am going to go for a long walk. She paused. Do we understand each other, Mr. Decker? Decker swallowed. He nodded. Boone walked back to Bear. She did not lower her voice. She did not have to. Bear, she said, I'm calling SWAT. I'm going to need 90 minutes to get them in position. I'm going to need a perimeter at the Morrison facility, and I'm going to need it without sirens. I cannot have those sirens hit the air before we're ready, because if the men inside that building hear them, Those 5 children will be dead before we get through the door. Understood, Bear said. There's one more thing, Boone said. Bear waited. There's been no Amber Alert. There's been no missing person bulletin. I've worked this department for 31 years, and I have never not one time seen 6 children disappear and nothing land on my desk. Not even a parent walking in. That doesn't happen by accident, Bear. That means somebody inside my department has been making it not happen. Bear nodded slowly. You got a name. Not yet, Boone said, but I'm going to. She turned to leave. She got 2 steps. She turned back. Bear, she said, when we go to Morrison tonight, those 5 kids are going to come out of that building scared and shaking and looking at flashing lights. They're going to see SWAT uniforms and tactical vests and rifles, and I am afraid of what that's going to do to them. I have armed law enforcement. I do not have anybody who looks like he can be trusted with a hurt child. She let that sit. I'm not authorizing your club to participate in the raid, she said. I'm not even going to acknowledge you were near it, but if a number of motorcycles happened to be parked 1 block away when the children came out of that building, and if those 5 children happened to see big men in leather jackets standing between them and the rest of the chaos, I would consider that a very lucky thing. Bear did not smile, but his eyes for a fraction of a second did something close. Detective, he said, you go do your job. We'll do ours. She nodded once and walked out into the rain. The door closed behind her. For a long moment, the only sound in Throttle's bar was Wyatt Carver breathing. Bear knelt down. He had not knelt down in 12 years. His left knee did not enjoy the experience. He did it anyway. He brought himself eye to eye with the boy in the booth. Wyatt, yes, sir. In a little while, your dad is going to come walk through that door. You understand me? Your dad is going to come walk through that door, and he is going to pick you up, and he is going to take you home. But before he gets here, I need you to do one thing for me. Can you do one thing? Wyatt nodded. I need you to tell me everything you remember about the place where they kept you, about the big building, the doors, the windows, where the men sleep, where they keep their guns, where the food is, how many of them are there, what time they change shifts, anything you saw, anything you heard. Even if you think it doesn't matter, it matters. Can you do that for me? The boy took a breath. He let it out. He started to talk. He talked for 14 minutes. Wrench typed every word into his laptop without looking at the keys. Brock stood behind, bare arms crossed, listening like a man who was building a map in his head. Cruz drifted to the door and watched the road. Stone moved between the back of the bar and the kitchen, securing the room. The 3 handcuffed men sat at the bar in absolute silence, their lives in handcuffs and their futures in pieces, and Wyatt Carver, 10 years old, talked. He talked about the guard with the cough. He talked about the broken second-floor window in the south wall, the one you could see the sky through if you stood on the desk. He talked about the bigger man who wore a wedding ring and the smaller one who didn't. He talked about the girl who cried at night whose name was Olivia, and the boy who would not stop praying out loud whose name was Caleb. He talked about Mason, who was 7 and who had wet himself the first night and who had cried so hard that one of the guards had threatened to shut him up for good. He talked about Sophia, who was 11, who was the oldest, who had kept the rest of them sane by telling them stories about a horse her grandfather had owned. He talked about Emily, who was 8 and who had not spoken a word in 72 hours. Wrench typed. The kitchen door opened. Bear looked up. David Carver was 38. He looked that night somewhere near 60. He had been a high school history teacher in Cedar Falls for 14 years. He had a kind, plain face and honest beard glasses with one cracked lens that he had not gotten around to replacing because he could not afford it. He was wearing the same shirt he had been wearing for 3 days. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had not slept in 72 hours. He stepped inside. He saw the boy. He stopped breathing. Wyatt looked up. Dad. The single word. David Carver crossed Throttle's bar in 5 steps, and he fell to his knees next to the booth, and he gathered his son into his arms with the kind of holding that men only do when they have given a child up for dead. Wyatt's small body went limp against his father's chest. The father's whole frame shook. He did not make any sound. He just held the boy and shook. Bear stood up. He stepped back. He gave them their distance. The bar, all 40 men looked away on instinct because the Iron Riders Motorcycle Club, however hard their faces had become over the years, still knew when to look away. Bear alone did not look away. He watched the father hold the son, and for the first time in 12 years, Slade Bear Mercer let himself remember, just for one heartbeat, what it had felt like to hold his grandson Owen, age 8, in his arms the morning before the funeral. His face did not change. His eyes did not change. But his right hand hanging at his side opened and closed once the way a hand does when it is reaching 12 years too late for something that is not there. Outside Throttle's bar, the rain kept falling. Somewhere 12 miles to the east in an empty pipe factory at the edge of town, 5 children were sitting in the dark in a locked office on the second floor listening for footsteps. One of them was praying. One of them was crying. One of them, the smallest, age 7, was so far past being able to cry that he was just rocking back and forth against the wall, his small hands wrapped around his own knees, his eyes wide open in the dark. None of them knew it yet, but 63 miles of road and 40 motorcycles were already in the process of turning their direction. In the back office of Throttle's Wrench, Flynn was at his laptop. The screen lit his face from below. He had pulled up the Cedar Falls Police Department dispatch log for the last 72 hours, and he was scrolling slowly, his finger moving with a kind of careful, lawyerly patience. He found something. He found it at 3:47 in the afternoon on Friday. There had been a 911 call from a school bus driver. The driver had reported a vehicle blocking the road at the stop on Old Mill and Pine. The dispatcher who had taken the call had logged it as civil disturbance and routed it to the lowest priority. No officer had been dispatched for 47 minutes. By the time anyone arrived, the bus driver was unconscious in the ditch, the bus was empty, and 6 children were gone. The name of the dispatcher who had taken that call was listed at the top of the log. Wendell Roth. Wrench stared at the name for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and he called Detective Margaret Boone. The rain kept falling on Cedar Falls. The night had only just begun. Detective Margaret Boone took the call in the cruiser halfway between Throttle's bar and the precinct. She listened. She did not interrupt. When Wrench Flynn was done, she said only 3 words. "Send me everything." Then she ended the call. She drove another half-mile in silence. She pulled the cruiser onto the gravel shoulder of Old Mill Road, killed the engine, and sat with her hands on the wheel. Wendell Roth. She had known Wendell Roth for 22 years. He had come into the department young, polite, married a girl from up the lake, raised 2 daughters. He had never been ambitious. He had never been a problem. He had been, in fact, exactly the kind of slow, careful, dependable presence that you wanted on dispatch when the calls came in fast and ugly. The kind of man you did not look at twice, which was, Margaret Boone reflected, exactly the kind of man you should always look at twice. She picked up the radio. "Dispatch," she said. "This is Detective Boone. Is Wendell Roth on shift tonight?" There was a pause. "Negative, Detective. Wendell called out sick about an hour ago." "An hour ago," Boone said. "That's affirmative." "Copy." She set the radio down. An hour ago had been roughly the moment that Wrench Flynn's call to dispatch about the Throttle situation would have moved up the chain. Wendell Roth had heard the address. Wendell Roth had heard the words "active abduction in progress." Wendell Roth had heard the name of one of his associates pulled out of a bar by a 63-year-old biker. And Wendell Roth had called out sick. Wendell Roth was running. Boone reached for the radio again and stopped. She put her hand on the gear shift instead. If she put out an 8B on Wendell Roth, every dispatcher and every uniform in 3 counties would hear it. Wendell knew them all. Wendell had been in their living rooms. Wendell had taught their kids Sunday school. If anyone heard that he was being pursued, one of them somewhere would call him, and he would be in Canada by morning. She had to do this quietly. She had to do this with people she could trust. She started the engine. She did not turn around toward the precinct. She turned the cruiser around and pointed it back toward Throttle's bar. When she walked back through that door, the bar was operating like a command post. Maps were spread on the pool table. Wrench had his laptop open beside them, and a hand-drawn floor plan of the Morrison Pipeworks was emerging from Wyatt Carver's memory line by line under the steady pencil of Brock Hogan. Cruz Donovan was on the phone with someone talking quietly. Stone Briggs was at the door. Bear was where she had left him, standing behind the booth, where Wyatt now sat curled against his father's chest, the boy half asleep, the father not asleep at all. Boone walked straight to Bear. I need to borrow you, she said. Bear nodded. He turned to David Carver. Sir, you stay right here in this booth. There's coffee. There's food. Wyatt's going to sleep about 10 minutes from now, mark my words. When he does, you're going to want to be exactly where he can see you when he opens his eyes again. We'll handle the rest. David Carver tried to say something. His voice would not come. Bear nodded once at him the way one man nods at another when there is nothing to say, and followed Boone to the back hallway. They stopped beside the walk-in cooler. Wendell Roth, she said. He called out sick an hour ago. He's running. You need help finding him. I need help finding him without anyone in my department knowing I'm looking. I have 4 officers I trust. The rest, until I know who else has been bought, I cannot use. Bear absorbed this. How many of mine can you take? 6. Quiet ones. No colors, no bikes. I need cars, and I need men who can knock on a back door without breaking it. You'll have them. Where's Roth most likely to go? He's got a cabin on Echo Lake, 43 minutes from here, registered to his wife's maiden name. He thinks nobody knows about it. Then somebody knows about it. His sister-in-law and me, Boone said. She and I went to high school together. She called me 5 years ago after Wendell put her sister in the hospital. I helped get the sister out. Wendell still doesn't know I know about the cabin. Bear looked at her for a moment. Margaret, he said, you've been carrying that for 5 years. I have been carrying a lot of things for a lot of years, Boone said. Dun. Tonight I'm putting some of them down. Bear nodded. He turned. He went back into the main room. He raised one hand. The bar stopped moving. Cruz, Jacks, Gunner, Kane, Stone, Axel, go change. No leather, no patches, civilian jackets, civilian trucks. We're going up the lake. Brock, you stay here. You run point on the Morrison plan with the detectives people. Wrench, you stay where you are. I'm going to need your computer in 20 minutes. 6 men were moving before he finished talking. Boone watched them. Bear, she said. Yeah, I asked for help finding him. I did not authorize anyone hurting him. Bear looked at her. Margaret, he said. I have not laid hands on a man in anger in 8 years. Tonight is not going to be the night I start again. We're going to find him, and we're going to sit on him until you arrive with handcuffs and a warrant. Are we clear? We're clear. Good. He turned to go. She stopped him with one hand on his sleeve. Bear. He waited. I never asked you, she said very quietly. About Owen. I'm sorry, I should have. His face did not change. He'd have been 21 next April, Bear said. That's all I'll say about it tonight. He walked away. Outside Throttle's bar, 6 men climbed into 3 pickup trucks. None of them were riding their bikes. None of them were wearing colors. They looked from the road like off-duty contractors driving home from a job. Bear climbed into the passenger seat of Cruz Donovan's Ford F-250. The convoy turned east toward Echo Lake. The rain kept falling. While the trucks rolled toward Echo Lake, the rest of the night was unfolding in 3 different places at once. At the Cedar Falls Police Precinct, Detective Margaret Boone had Garrett Decker in an interrogation room. She had not turned on the camera. She had not Mirandized him a second time. She had simply set a thermos of coffee on the table between them, sat down across from him and waited. He had broken in 11 minutes. He had told her about the operation, 3 states, 4 years, working-class families, school routes, church groups, after-school programs. They watched. They picked the families whose social media showed 2 working parents in 1 car. They timed the bus driver's brakes. They had a database. They demanded $50,000 per child paid in untraceable money orders. Their pitch to parents was always the same. Don't call the police. Bring the money. You'll get your child back. We've done this many times. We always honor the deal. Sometimes they even did. The first 16 kids had gone home alive. The reason they had survived this long was simple. Working parents do not call the police. Working parents call their pastor, their boss, their brother-in-law. Working parents take out second mortgages. Working parents sell their wedding rings. Working parents do exactly what frightened working parents have always done, which is to comply and pray. But the Carver bus had been different. The Carver bus had been 6 children at once. 6 $50,000 demands going out to 6 families in 3 days. And one of those 6 children had been Wyatt Carver, whose father was a history teacher who had spent his summers in his early 20s as a wilderness survival instructor at a camp in Idaho, who had taught his son to pick a slip knot with his teeth, who had spent every Saturday morning of Wyatt's childhood teaching him how not to be afraid in the dark. That was the part Garrett Decker had not factored in. He had picked a boy whose father, broke as he was, had built a son who could chew through a rope. And the inside man, Boone said when Decker had run out of words, Wendell Roth. Decker did not answer. Mr. Decker, Boone said, if Wendell Roth is found at his lake cabin tonight, and you are the one who put me on to him, that will be a significant detail when this comes in front of a judge. If, on the other hand, you continue to protect him, you and Roth are going to walk into a federal courtroom standing exactly the same distance away from a life sentence. Do you understand me? Decker looked at her for a long moment. Then he gave her 2 phone numbers. She walked out of the room and called the first one. It rang to voicemail. The recorded greeting in a calm, polite, slightly bored voice said, "Hi, you have reached Vernon Blackwood. I am currently unavailable. Please leave a detailed message, and I will return your call as soon as I am able." Boone stood very still in the hallway with the phone against her ear. Vernon Blackwood, Superintendent of Cedar Falls Unified School District, 48 years old, married, 2 grown children, member of the Rotary Club, member of the United Methodist Church Board, honorary marshal of the 4th of July Parade, the man who had given the eulogy at the principal of Cedar Falls High School's funeral 2 years before. She did not leave a message. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. She walked back into the interrogation room. She looked at Decker. "Mr. Decker," she said, "who is Vernon Blackwood to you?" Garrett Decker looked at the table. For the first time, he looked afraid. "He's the man who picks the children," Decker said. While Detective Boone was learning the name Vernon Blackwood, for the first time Brock Hogan was leaning over the pool table at Throttle's bar, sketching the second floor of the Morrison Pipeworks in fine pencil, while Wyatt Carver, half asleep against his father's chest, murmured corrections. "There's a hole in the ceiling," Wyatt mumbled. "In the room they put Sophia in. You can see the sky. Big enough to climb through. Maybe. What's right above it? Birds, pigeons. There's pigeons up there. What floor? 3. Brock marked the spot with an X. "Okay, son, anything else? Anything else you can think of?" Wyatt was silent for a long moment. His breathing slowed. Brock thought he had fallen asleep. He started to put the pencil down. Wyatt's voice, smaller than before, came up from his father's shirt. "There's a man," Wyatt said. "That came twice. Not one of the guards. A different one. He came in a black car. He came into the office where they kept us. He looked at us. He didn't say anything. He just looked at us like he was what, son? Like he was buying us." Brock put the pencil down. He turned and looked at the back of the bar where Wrench Flynn was at his laptop. "Wrench," Brock said, "I'm going to need you to start looking at black sedans registered to anyone who's been in the school district in the last 10 years. Wrench did not look up. He just nodded. "On it." Brock looked back down at the boy. "Wyatt," he said, "what did this man look like? Can you remember?" "Tall," Wyatt mumbled. "Not as tall as Bear. Skinny, glasses, gray hair on the sides. He smiled at us. He had a—" The boy's voice trailed off. "He had a pin on his jacket, like a flag, but not the flag, a different flag." "What did the flag look like?" "It had a tree on it," Wyatt whispered. "A tree in a mountain." David Carver looked up sharply at Brock. The Cedar Falls Unified School District logo, which appeared on every staff lapel pin in the district, was a tree in front of a mountain. David Carver knew this because David Carver, history teacher, had been wearing one for 14 years. "Brock," David said. His voice came out thin and shaky. "That sounds like a school district pin. That sounds like one of ours." Brock looked at him. "Mr. Carver," Brock said slowly, "how many people in your district wear that pin?" "Senior administrators, maybe 20 people in the whole district." "And who's the top of that list?" David Carver did not answer at first. He looked down at his sleeping son, and his hand, the hand pressed against the boy's back, started to shake. "The superintendent," he said, "Vernon Blackwood." 2 miles south of Echo Lake Cruz, Donovan killed the headlights on the F-250 and rolled the truck the last 300 yards on instinct and moonlight. The other 2 trucks did the same behind him. The road bent through a stand of pines, and the pines opened out onto the gravel driveway of a small log cabin set back among the trees. Lights were on in 2 of the windows. There was a Ford Bronco parked beside the cabin. Mud splattered the engine, still ticking as it cooled. Bear stepped out of the truck. He did it carefully. The gravel under his boots crunched once, and then he stood very still and let his eyes adjust. The 6 other men stepped out behind him. Nobody made any noise. There was no plan. There did not need to be. Cruz went left around the back of the cabin. Gunner Locke went right toward the Bronco. Kane Dalton and Axel Riggs stayed at the truck, watching the road. Stone Briggs walked without hurrying to the front porch. Jax Pierce followed Bear. Bear stepped onto the porch. The boards groaned just once under his weight. The cabin door opened from the inside. Wendell Roth stood in the doorway with a hunting rifle in his hands. He was 51. He was thin. He was wearing a wool sweater that his wife had probably yet knitted for him the way wives in this part of Montana still knit sweaters. His glasses were crooked on his nose. He had been packing. There was a duffel bag on the kitchen table behind him. There was a cardboard box of cash on top of the duffel bag. There was a passport open beside the box. He stared at Bear. Bear stared at him. Bear, who had stood on the porch with both hands open at his sides, raised them slowly until they were at shoulder height, palms out. The way a man surrenders. The way a man also says, "Look at my hands. They are empty. Yours don't need to be full." "Mr. Roth," Bear said quietly, "Margaret Boone is 43 minutes behind us." Wendell Roth's hands tightened on the rifle. "Mr. Roth," Bear said again, "I'm not the law. I'm not press. I'm not here to make you a story. I'm a 63-year-old man who came up this road tonight to make sure you stayed here until she got here. That's all. You set that rifle down. You sit at your kitchen table. You talk to her when she walks in, and you have a chance, a small chance, but a chance to be the man who told the truth about Vernon Blackwood. Or you can lift that rifle one more inch, and you can find out very quickly how this evening ends for you. Your choice." Wendell Roth's eyes moved. For a fraction of a second, they flicked involuntarily past Bear's shoulder to where Stone Briggs was standing in the dark 12 feet behind the porch, and Cruz Donovan was at the corner of the house, and Jax Pierce was already inside the kitchen because Jax Pierce had come in through the side window when nobody was looking. Wendell Roth saw all of that. He saw in particular Jax Pierce, who was standing in his own kitchen, who had one hand resting on the kitchen counter and the other resting on the back of a chair, and who looked in that moment like a man whose patience had a very specific shelf life. Wendell Roth set the rifle down on the porch. He sat down on the top step. He put his face in his hands, and he cried. He cried for a long time. He cried like a man who had been carrying something heavy uphill for a very long time and had just been told he could let go. He cried like a man who had been afraid every day for 4 years and who was suddenly more tired than afraid. Bear stood on the porch. He did not touch him. He just stood there and let the man cry. When Wendell Roth finally stopped, he wiped his face on the cuff of his wool sweater, and he looked up at Bear with eyes that were red and small. "He has my daughter," Wendell said. "Vernon, he has my daughter." Bear's whole body went still. "What do you mean he has your daughter, Wendell?" "My older girl, Madeline. She's a junior at the high school. He's her academic advisor. He has been her academic advisor since she was a freshman. 4 years ago, he called me into his office. He told me he had photographs of her. He said if I didn't help him, those photographs would be on the internet by the end of the day. He said he didn't want money. He said he just wanted me to make some 911 calls go slow, sometimes. Not always, just sometimes. And he showed me the photographs." Bear did not speak. Wendell Roth pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "I should have shot him in his office that day," Wendell said. "I should have shot him and shot myself and put the photographs in an envelope to Margaret Boone and let her clean it up. That's what a real man does. I have known that every day for 4 years. And I did not do it. I did what he told me. I made the calls go slow. I made the reports go slow. I cost children, Bear. I cost children." "How many?" Bear said. 11 that I know of," Wendell whispered. 11 I helped delay. 6 of them came home. 5 of them did not." The porch was silent. 40 miles back at Throttle's bar in the back hallway, Margaret Boone got the call. She listened. She closed her eyes. She said, "Bring him in alive. And bring him to me, not to the desk, Sergeant. To me. I'll meet you at the precinct's back door in 50 minutes. She hung up. She walked into the interrogation room. She looked at Garrett Decker. "Mr. Decker," she said, "I'm going to ask you one more time, and the only correct answer is the truth. Does Vernon Blackwood, in addition to selecting your targets, have anything else on his hands?" Garrett Decker, who had been a recruiter for this operation, who had personally pulled 6 children off 6 buses in his career, who had until tonight believed himself to be the worst man he had ever met, looked at Margaret Boone with eyes that had gone slightly hollow. "Detective," he said, "Vernon doesn't pick them for the money. Vernon picks them because he likes to walk into the room and look at them while they're tied up. The money is for the operation. The children are for him." Margaret Boone, who had been a cop for 31 years, sat down very slowly across from him. She put her hand on the table. She breathed. "Okay, Mr. Decker," she said, "tell me everything." While Wendell Roth was being driven quietly and without sirens to the back door of the Cedar Falls Police Precinct, the raid on the Morrison Pipeworks went down at 4:12 in the morning. 26 Iron Riders parked their bikes 1 block from the perimeter and got off. They did not draw weapons. They did not approach the building. They lined up along the back side of the SWAT staging area in the dark, with the rain still falling, and they waited. SWAT entered the building through 3 points at the same instant. The first guard, the one who smoked too much and coughed when he laughed, was taken from behind without ever reaching his rifle. He was 60 feet from the south door. He went down without sound and was zip-tied in the wet grass before he understood what had happened. The second guard had a sandwich halfway to his mouth in the makeshift kitchen on the first floor. He saw the SWAT team coming through the doorway. He went for a pistol on the table beside him. He did not get there. He was on the floor 7 seconds later. The third guard, the one Wyatt had not warned them about, the one who had not been there the day Wyatt had escaped, was on the second floor. He had a rifle. He fired 3 rounds down the staircase. 1 round struck Stone Briggs, who had pushed himself against orders, against everyone's better judgment, against Bear's specific instructions to stay behind the SWAT line, into the building beside the lead SWAT officer. Stone Briggs went down on the second floor landing with a bullet in his left thigh, 3 inches from his femoral artery. He did not scream. He rolled himself behind a concrete pillar, applied a tourniquet from his belt, one-handed, and called out, "Keep moving, I'm hit, but I'm clear. Get the kids." The SWAT team did not stop. They cleared the third guard in 8 seconds. The office door on the second floor, the one Wyatt had described, was padlocked from the outside. A SWAT officer cut the lock with a bolt cutter, and the door swung open. In the dark of the office, 5 children sat in a row against the back wall. They were holding hands. The oldest, Sophia, 11 years old, had her arm around the youngest Mason, 7, who had finally stopped rocking. Caleb, 9, was praying so quietly that you could not hear the words. Olivia, 10, had her face pressed into Sophia's shoulder. Emily, 8, who had not spoken in 72 hours, looked up at the silhouettes in the doorway. Emily was the first to make a sound. She made a small, broken noise that was not quite a word. The SWAT officers, all 6 of them, men who had children of their own men, who had trained for years to enter rooms and not feel anything, stood in that doorway, and for 1 second did not move. Then the lead officer lowered his rifle. He took off his helmet. He crouched down. He held out one gloved hand. "Hi," he said. "My name's Officer Reyes. I'm a police officer. Your moms and dads be looking for you, and we are here to take you home. Is that okay with you?" Sophia, 11, stared at him. Sophia, 11, did not let go of Mason. Sophia, 11, said, "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, sweetheart." The children began very slowly to stand up. Mason could not stand at first. His legs had been folded under him too long. Olivia and Caleb, between them, lifted him one under each arm and walked him forward step by step, the way you walk an old man across a parking lot. Emily walked behind them alone, her arms wrapped around her own waist, her eyes on the floor. Sophia came last. Sophia would not leave that office until she had counted the others through the door twice, the way she had counted them every night for 3 nights. The medics met them at the bottom of the stairs. The medics had warm blankets. The medics had water in small bottles. The medics had crouched down to eye level before they spoke, because the medics had been briefed by Detective Margaret Boone, and Detective Margaret Boone had told them very specifically that no adult was to address any of those children from a standing position for the next 24 hours. Officer Reyes spoke into his radio. 5 recoveries, all 5 alive, all 5 mobile. Bring up medics and bring up the bikes. Outside the Morrison Pipeworks, the rain had begun to ease. The sky to the east was not yet light, but it was no longer pure black. It was the color of weak coffee, the kind of color that lets a man know dawn is not far off. 26 iron riders stood in a long, loose line that stretched from the building's front door to the line of waiting ambulances. They had taken off their helmets. They had taken off their gloves. They had unzipped their leather jackets and pushed back their hoods. They stood with their hands open at their sides the way men stand at a wake. Bear was at the front of the line. The 5 children came out one at a time, walking under blankets that medics had wrapped around their thin shoulders. Sophia, first carrying Mason, then Caleb walking on his own, then Olivia, then Emily walking the slowest, looking at the ground. The children walked past the row of bikers. They did not flinch. They did not run. A girl, the third one out, Olivia, 10 years old, broke from her medic and walked straight to the biggest man in the line, which was Bear, and she stood in front of him with her face tipped up. "Sir," she said in a small voice that did not match the night that had just ended for her. "Are you the one who came to get us?" Bear got down on one knee. His left knee did not like it. He did not care. "Sweetheart," he said, "we all came. Every one of us." Olivia looked at the row of leathered, tattooed, weathered men standing in the dawn. She nodded once. She reached out one small, cold hand. She rested it for a moment on the back of Bear's hand. "Thank you," she said. Then she walked back to the medic and let him lead her into the ambulance. Bear stayed on his knees for another beat. His head bowed just for a moment, the way a man bows his head in a church he has not been inside in 12 years. Then he stood up and he walked back to his bike, and he did not say anything else for a long time. At 6:47 in the morning, Garrett Decker Wendell Roth, and a third source whose name was sealed under a cooperation agreement, gave Detective Margaret Boone the full set of phone records connecting the operation to Vernon Blackwood. Boone took the records, the recordings, and the financial spreadsheets Wrench Flynn had pulled out of 3 offshore shift companies overnight, and she walked into the office of the county district attorney at 9 in the morning. By 11:30 in the morning, a sealed warrant was signed. By 1 in the afternoon, Vernon Blackwood, superintendent of Cedar Falls Unified School District, was arrested in the parking lot of a Methodist church in his Sunday best, 3 minutes after he had finished delivering the welcome address at a Rotary Club luncheon. He did not resist. He smiled at the arresting officers. He told them they had made a serious mistake. He told them his attorney would be in touch. He was very carefully not told what he had been arrested for. He found out 40 minutes later in a cell alone when Detective Margaret Boone walked into the holding area, sat down on a metal stool, and laid 11 photographs on the table between them. The photographs showed 11 children. 6 of them were the children he had ordered taken in this case. The other 5 were the children who had been taken in his previous operations. 3 of those 5 children were dead. 2 of them had never been found. Vernon Blackwood looked at the photographs. His face did not change. That Margaret Boone would later say was the thing she remembered most. His face did not change at all. The arrest of Vernon Blackwood broke Cedar Falls in half. Not loudly. Cedar Falls was not the kind of town that broke loudly. It was the kind of town that broke in kitchens, in church basements, in the parking lots of grocery stores, in conversations conducted in low voices over chain-link fences. By the time the sun had set on the day of Blackwood's arrest, every adult in Cedar Falls knew, and every adult in Cedar Falls had taken a position. There were 2 camps. The first camp said simply that they had always known, that something about Vernon Blackwood had never sat right, that he had been too smooth, that his eyes had moved a certain way around the high school girls at the 4th of July parade, that his wife, Catherine Blackwood, who had divorced him quietly in 2017 and moved to Spokane, had probably known the most of all. The second camp said just as loudly that this was a misunderstanding, that Vernon Blackwood had served the district for 19 years, that he had personally funded the new gymnasium, that he had given the eulogy at Principal Mike Kerrigan's funeral, that this was perhaps a setup, that the Iron Riders had a grudge, that the Carver family had always been strange, that in any case the boy was 10 years old and 10-year-old boys made things up. The first camp was made of people who had children. The second camp was made of people who had power. By the second week, the second camp had hired Vernon Blackwood's defense team. It was a 5-attorney firm out of Helena. They flew in. They held a press conference. They used phrases like rush to judgment and vigilante interference. and the dangers of trial by motorcycle. They demanded the release of their client on bail. The judge denied bail. The defense filed a motion to suppress. The judge denied the motion to suppress. The defense filed a motion to dismiss. The judge denied the motion to dismiss. And on the third day after Vernon Blackwood's arrest, a black SUV with tinted windows parked across the street from David Carver's house at 11:47 at night. It was Bear who saw it first. Bear had taken to spending his nights on the Carver porch. He had not asked permission. He had simply arrived at sundown on the second day with a folding chair and a thermos and a paperback book that he never opened. He sat on the porch from sundown to sunrise. He spoke to no one. He drank black coffee. He watched the road. David Carver on the second night had come out at 2 a.m. with a quilt over his shoulders and a mug of coffee. He had sat down on the porch step beside Bear, and he had not said anything for a long time. Then he had said, "You don't have to be here, Mr. Mercer." "Yeah," Bear had said, "I do." David Carver had nodded. He had gone back inside. That had been the extent of the conversation. On the third night at 11:47, the black SUV pulled to the curb across the street. Bear did not move. He did not stand. He did not put down his coffee. He raised the radio at his hip. "Cruise, black SUV, Carver House, now." He clicked off. The SUV sat at the curb for 2 minutes. The headlights were off. The engine was running. Bear could see the silhouettes of 2 men in the front seats. After 2 minutes, the driver's door opened. A man stepped out. He was wearing a dark coat. He was holding something dark in his right hand, low against his thigh, the way a man holds a thing he hopes nobody sees yet. He walked casually across the street. He stepped onto the lawn of David Carver's house. He looked up at the second-floor window, where Wyatt's bedroom light was on. He raised his right hand. Bear stood up. He did it without sound. 63 years old, 280 pounds, and not one board on that porch creaked. He stepped off the porch and walked across the lawn, and the man with the gun, who had been looking up at the second-floor window, turned a half-second too late. Bear put his hand around the man's wrist. He did not break it. He could have. He did not. He squeezed it slowly until the man dropped the gun in the wet grass. He put his other hand on the side of the man's neck. He leaned down to his ear. "Son," Bear said, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. There is a 10-year-old boy in the window upstairs. He has been through a thing in his life that no child should ever go through. He has been home for 3 days. He has slept in those 3 days for a total of approximately 11 hours. I have counted because I have been sitting on this porch, and you came to this house tonight with a gun in your hand. So I'm going to ask you one question, and the answer to that question is going to determine the rest of your week. Who sent you?" The man, 26 years old, 200 pounds, a fully armed and trained operator from a contract security firm in Bozeman, looked up at the 63-year-old man whose hand was wrapped around his throat, and he understood with absolute clarity that he was in the worst trouble of his life. "Brad," he gasped, "Brad Whitman, out of Bozeman. He paid me $10,000. I don't know who paid him." 2 trucks pulled up. Krusbrock, Wrench, and Stone, who was on crutches but who had refused to stay home, climbed out. The SUV across the street tried to pull away. Stone, even on crutches, brought up a tire puncturing device from the back of the truck and threw it under the rear tires before the driver had gotten 10 feet. The SUV rolled to a stop with 2 flat tires and a driver who by then had figured out the night was over. Bear handed the gunman by his collar to Brock Hogan. He picked up the gun off the grass. He carried it back to the porch. He sat back down in his folding chair. He took a sip of his coffee. He picked up his radio. "Margaret," he said, "we have 2 more for you." In Vernon Blackwood's holding cell the next morning, Margaret Boone walked in with a folder and she sat down. "Vernon," she said. He did not look at her. "Vernon, last night a man named Brad Whitman out of Bozeman sent 2 armed men to the home of Wyatt Carver. They were stopped on the lawn. Both of them are talking. Brad Whitman, as of approximately 40 minutes ago, is also talking. Do you know what Brad Whitman is saying, Vernon?" Vernon did not look at her. "He is saying," Boone continued, "that you paid him $15,000 on Tuesday evening in cash in the parking lot of a Sinclair gas station outside Lewistown to kill a 10-year-old boy. Now, the legal name for that, Vernon, is solicitation of murder. Specifically, solicitation of murder of a witness in an active criminal proceeding. Specifically, solicitation of murder of a witness who is a minor child. Vernon looked at her. For the first time his face did something. It went very slightly white around the mouth. "My lawyer," he said. "Your lawyer," Boone said, "has been informed. Your lawyer is on his way." "I'll wait." "You'll wait." She sat with him in silence for the next 18 minutes until the lawyer arrived. She did not say another word. She did not need to. The trial of Vernon Blackwood began on the 17th of March. It was held in the county courthouse in Cedar Falls, in the same wood-paneled room where Vernon Blackwood had 2 summers earlier given an address to the local Boy Scout troop about the importance of integrity in public service. The prosecution's case ran for 6 days. Garrett Decker testified. He gave the timeline. He gave the names. He gave the bank accounts. He identified Vernon Blackwood sitting at the defense table in a dark gray suit as the man who had selected each of the 6 Cedar Falls children and the 11 children before them. The defense cross-examined him for 2 hours. He did not waver. Wendell Boss testified. He gave the photographs Vernon had used to blackmail him. He cried twice. He looked when he was done like a man who had been waiting 4 years to put down a stone. Wrench Flynn testified as a forensic financial consultant retained by the prosecution. He walked the jury through the offshore accounts, the shell companies, the wire transfers. The jury did not understand all of it. The jury did not need to. They understood the bottom line, which was $1.2 million siphoned from the Cedar Falls Unified School District over a 4-year period into accounts that traced through 6 layers back to Vernon Blackwood. Margaret Boone testified. She spoke for 41 minutes. She did not raise her voice once. And then the prosecution called Wyatt Carver. Wyatt was 11 now. He had grown 2 inches since October. He had cut his hair short on his own request because the long hair reminded him of the night he had run barefoot through the rain. He wore a blue button-down shirt and a clip-on tie that his mother had bought him. He held the railing of the witness box with both hands. He looked at the jury. He did not look at Vernon Blackwood. The prosecutor, a woman named Helen Brody, asked him very gently about the bus. Wyatt told her about the bus. She asked him just as gently about the building. Wyatt told her about the building. She asked him about the rope. Wyatt held up his wrists. The scars were healed by then, but they were still visible. Thin pink rings, one around each wrist that would never quite fade. She asked him finally the question that everyone in the room had been waiting on. Wyatt, while you were being held in that building, did anyone else come into the room besides the 2 guards? Yes, ma'am. Can you describe that person? He was tall, not as tall as my friend Bear. He had glasses. He had gray hair on the sides. He wore a black coat. He had a pin on his coat. The pin was a tree in a mountain. Did this person speak? No, ma'am. He just looked at us. For how long? A long time. The first time, maybe 2 minutes. The second time, longer. Maybe 10 minutes. Wyatt is the person who came into that room and looked at you in this courtroom today. Wyatt, for the first time, looked at Vernon Blackwood. His grip on the railing tightened. He did not look away. Yes, ma'am. Will you point him out for the jury? Wyatt raised one arm. He pointed at the man in the dark gray suit at the defense table. Him, Wyatt said. The courtroom did not gasp. The courtroom held its breath the way the room at Throttle's bar had held its breath the night the boy had run through the door, the way every room in Wyatt Carver's small history had held its breath when he had needed something to be still. The defense attorney rose to cross-examine. The defense attorney was a soft-handed man from Helena named Robert Pierce. He had spent 30 years getting men in suits out of accusations that they had earned. He looked at Wyatt with the kind of practiced gentleness that men like him used to disarm small witnesses. Wyatt, he said, you were in that building for 3 days. Yes, sir. And you were frightened, weren't you? Yes, sir. And it was dark. Yes, sir. Oh. And the man you say came into the room, you didn't see him for very long. 2 times, sir. The first time 2 minutes, the second time 10 minutes. You said, but you were frightened and it was dark and you were tired and you didn't see him for very long. Is it possible, Wyatt, that you might be mistaken? Wyatt looked at him. Wyatt was 11 years old. Wyatt had run barefoot through a rainstorm and grabbed a stranger's vest and asked to be saved, and the stranger had saved him, and now the stranger sat in the second row of the courtroom in a clean gray button-down with his hair combed to watching. Wyatt thought for a long moment. Sir, Wyatt said, when he came in the second time, he stood right next to where I was sitting. He smelled like coffee and like a kind of cologne my dad's friend Mr. Halloran wears. He had a scratch on his left ear, like a cat had scratched him, and it was scabbed over. And when he turned to leave, he stopped at the door and he said one word. He said a word. Yes, sir. You testified previously on direct that he didn't speak. He didn't speak the first time. He spoke the second time. And what word did he say? He said enough, Wyatt said. He said enough, like he was telling somebody he was done looking. And then he walked out. The courtroom was silent. Robert Pierce looked for the first time like a man whose suit no longer fit him. He had nothing else. He sat down. The jury was out for 3 hours and 21 minutes. They returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Vernon Blackwood was sentenced 6 weeks later to 47 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He would be 95 years old, the judge noted, at the earliest day he could possibly be released. He would not see Montana again. Garrett Decker received life in prison with the possibility of parole at 25 years. Brad Whitman received life without parole. Wendell Roth, who had testified for the prosecution, who had brought 4 years of records and recordings with him into the witness box, who had wept twice on the stand, was sentenced to 12 years. He requested and was granted a transfer to a federal facility in Oregon near where his daughter Madeline was now in college. Stone Briggs, who had been shot in the leg on the second floor of the Morrison Pipeworks, walked with a slight limp for the rest of his life. He was awarded an honorary citation by the city of Cedar Falls, which he kept hanging on the wall of his garage. Below it, he hung a framed drawing that Wyatt had made for him of an iron rider with a star above his head. On the 1st of June, 6 months and 2 weeks after the night Wyatt Carver had run into Throttle's bar, the city of Cedar Falls demolished the Morrison Pipeworks. The wrecking ball arrived at 9 in the morning. A small crowd had gathered. Bear was there. So were Brock Cruz Wrench, Stonejack's Gunner, Kane, Axel Rex, and 20 other iron riders. The children were there, Sophia, Caleb, Olivia, Mason, Emily, and Wyatt. Their parents were there. Detective Margaret Boone was there in plain clothes with her grown daughter beside her, both of them holding coffee cups. The mayor was there. The mayor said something into a microphone about closure and community in the future. He was not a bad mayor. He was just a mayor. Bear did not listen to the speech. Bear was watching Wyatt. Wyatt was standing between his mother and his father. He was wearing the small leather vest that Bear had given him the previous Christmas. On the back, in small, neat stitching, Honorary Member Iron Riders Motorcycle Club. Below that, Guardian Watch. The wrecking ball swung. The first wall came down. A cheer went up from the crowd. The dust rose. When it cleared, the children, all 6 of them, were standing together, holding hands, watching the building fall. Olivia, 10 and a half, who 6 months earlier had walked across wet grass in the dawn to put her hand on the back of a 63-year-old biker's hand, broke from her parents and walked to Bear. She tugged at his sleeve. He looked down. "Mr. Bear," she said. "Yes, sweetheart. Will you come with us when they build the new one?" Bear looked at her. He looked at the dust rising over the lot where the Morrison Pipeworks had been. He looked at the row of children behind her. He looked at his brothers in their leather, standing in a loose half circle in the morning light. "Honey," he said, "I will come with you anytime you want me to." 6 months after that, the Cedar Falls Community Center for Children opened on the lot where the Morrison Pipeworks had stood. It was a 1-story building with a wide front porch, a long classroom wing, an indoor playground, a small library, and a counseling office staffed by 2 licensed therapists who had agreed to work for the city at a reduced rate. At the front entrance, a brass plaque had been mounted into the brick. The plaque read, "In gratitude to the 6 children who survived, in memory of the children who did not, protected by Guardian Watch." Below it, in smaller letters, was a quote that the parents of the 6 children had voted unanimously to include. It read, "When you cannot make the world safe, you can still stand between it and a child." Bear had not asked for the quote. He had not approved it. He had not been consulted. He found out about it the morning of the opening. When he walked up to the plaque read, it took off his sunglasses and stood very still for a full minute. Wyatt Carver, 11 and a half years old in a small leather vest, walked up beside him. He took Bear's hand. He didn't say anything. He just held it. After a while, Bear's other hand came up and rested on the top of Wyatt's head, the way it had rested on the boy's head the first night in Throttle's bar, with the rain coming down and the world about to break wide open. That afternoon after the opening, Bear rode his bike out to the Cedar Falls Cemetery alone. It was a 40-minute ride. He took the long way. When he reached the cemetery, he parked the bike at the gate and walked on his bad knee through the rows of stones until he came to the one he wanted. It was a small headstone, white marble, already a little weathered after 12 years. The stone bore the name Owen Mercer, beloved son, beloved grandson. Born in the spring, lost in the summer, 8 years old when he went into the ground. Bear stood in front of the stone for a long time. He took off his hat. He folded it in his hands. He cleared his throat. He started to speak. He stopped. He started again. "Owen," he said. His voice was rough. It got stuck. He waited. He started over. "Owen, I am sorry I am 12 years late getting here. I have come a few times. You know I have. I just haven't said anything in a long time." The wind moved across the cemetery. "I want to tell you about a boy," Bear said. "His name is Wyatt. He is 10. Well, he is 11 now by a few months. I want to tell you what he did. I want to tell you what we did. I want to tell you about 5 other children in a building that does not exist anymore, and a man who is going to die in a prison cell." Bear paused. He breathed. "I could not get to you in time, son. I have been carrying that for 12 years. I am not going to put it down today. I will probably not put it down ever. But last October in the rain, a boy ran into a bar and he grabbed my coat and he asked me to keep him safe. And I did. And then we kept 5 others safe. And then we kept the whole town safe. I do not know if this counts for anything in whatever place you are in now, but I wanted you to know." He bowed his head. The cemetery was very quiet. "I did not save you," Bear said very softly, "but I think maybe you saved them. Through me. I think maybe every door I went through that night you went through with me. I think maybe you were the reason I did not turn around." He let that sit. After a while, he reached into the inside pocket of his cut and took out a small folded piece of paper. It was a drawing. It was the drawing Wyatt Carver had made 2 weeks earlier of 40 bikers standing in front of 6 children. At the top in pencil, in the small, careful handwriting of a 5th grader, were the words, "This is what you look like when you saved us." Bear unfolded it. He looked at it for a long time. He laid it carefully at the base of the headstone. He weighed it down with a stone the size of his palm so the wind would not take it. "This is from him," Bear said. "He doesn't know I brought it to you. He'd like that you have it, though." He put his hat back on. He stood for a moment longer. "I have to go," he said. "There are some kids waiting for me at the center. I told them I would come back after. I do not break promises to kids anymore, Owen. I learned that one the hard way." He turned and walked back to his bike. He started it. The engine caught on the first try the way it always did. He rolled out of the gate onto the highway and pointed the bike back towards Cedar Falls. The wind was warm. The sky was clear. The road was open. And somewhere ahead of him, in a brand new building with a brass plaque at the door, 6 children were waiting, and a long line of leather-jacketed brothers was waiting beside them, and a small boy named Wyatt was standing on the front porch in a leather vest 2 sizes too big, looking down the road for the sound of an engine he had learned to listen for. The engine came over the hill. The boy lifted his hand. And Slade Bear Mercer, 63 years old, 280 pounds of stillness, lifted his own hand back. That was how it ended. That was how, in a small town in Montana, on the long road out of October, the worst night of a 10-year-old boy's life became the first day of 1,000 other children's safety. That was how 40 bikers, the kind of men this country had spent a long time learning to be afraid of, became the kind of men this country had been waiting all along to be saved by. That was how, on the night the rain came down and a barefoot boy ran through a door, the Iron Riders Motorcycle Club, which had been called many things over 31 years, was finally called by the only name that ever mattered. They were called the Men Who Showed Up.